Welcome to Chapel Vault. I'm your host, and today we return to the quiet corners of rural England, to a village largely erased from modern maps where fog settles thicker than memory and silence is often mistaken for peace. This is the story of Briar Hollow, a place most people have never heard of, and perhaps for good reason. What happened there over the course of more than a century was quietly buried under land records, false censuses, and burnt parish logs, but traces remain in archived letters, in whispered warnings from old families, and in the memories of those few who made it out broken, changed, or simply gone. You won't find Briar Hollow on a modern Ordnance Survey chart, but in 1822 it was listed as a small self-contained parish settlement in North Yorkshire nestled between the village of Bedale and the rising woods of what is now called Thornwick Moor. Officially it was home to fewer than 200 people, but this number we now believe was never accurate, because Briar Hollow housed something else, something not counted by census takers, not visible on property rolls, something kept just outside the reach of church registers and medical authorities. It began with an orphanage, or rather, something that called itself one. The Holloway House for Displaced Girls was founded in 1804. The institution was supposedly established under the direction of Lady Cressida Loughton, a reclusive noblewoman from a minor aristocratic line whose wealth was tied to old Yorkshire coal. Lady Loughton, known for eccentric religious beliefs and brief public outbursts about saving the bloodlines of Albion, acquired a parcel of moorland in what was then Briar Hollow and had a structure erected by local laborers under heavy secrecy. Local records refer to the property simply as the house. No blueprints survive. No floor plans were ever submitted. But based on surviving sketches from a parish deacon named Jonas Milbank, we know this. It had no graveyard, no chapel, and no windows on the east side. The house began accepting orphaned girls almost immediately, but only certain ones. They were brought in not from cities or poorhouses, but from distant rural towns selected, it seems not for their need, but for something else. Something they had in common. In letters from Father Milbank to his superior in York, he wrote, "They come by night wagons, all of them dark-haired, pale, and strangely quiet. The house does not ring with play nor prayer. It is silent. It is watching. Even the trees around it seem unnatural. No record exists of how many girls passed through Holloway House. No birth records, no adoption records, no deaths. And, perhaps most disturbing of all, no graves. A house operating for over 80 years with no burials. No final rites. And yet, not a single girl is known to have grown up and left to live elsewhere. Where did they go?" In 1884, the illusion cracked. A man named Isaac Barrett, a railway surveyor, was assigned to assess land near Briar Hollow for a possible extension of the Northeastern Railway. His journal, preserved today in private archives, details something strange. Barrett arrived expecting a declining village. What he found instead was stillness. No livestock, no children. Homes that looked occupied but were entirely silent, and the Holloway house, tall gray and seemingly abandoned, still stood at the edge of the woods. But most unsettling of all were the children. Barrett wrote, they stood in the tree line. Not playing, not speaking, watching, all of them barefoot, clad in gray, their heads tilted. I thought they were statues at first, but then one blinked, just once. That night, Barrett camped a half-mile outside the village. He awoke to find muddy footprints around his tent, small barefoot impressions circling but never entering. He reported what he'd seen to railway officials. A month later, his post was reassigned, and Briar Hollow was struck from future railway plans. Barrett resigned the following year. 3 months after that, he was found dead in his flat in York. Official cause suicide. But his final letter sent to a cousin read, "There were never any graves." That's how you know. It's not that they didn't die, it's that they never stopped being used. What does that mean? Over the next hour, we'll follow the paper trail through lost church documents, suppressed government correspondence, and fragments of first-hand testimony to uncover what really happened in Briar Hollow and what became of the children who were taken there. But I warn you, if the Holloway House was truly what some believe it was, not an orphanage but something older in disguise, then the horrors that took place were not just crimes, they were rituals, and their purpose may not have ended when the house was abandoned. This is The Children of Briar Hollow, a forgotten English horror, and we're just getting started. Lady Cressida Loughton appeared in no great histories. A minor noblewoman from a Yorkshire coal line, unmarried, childless, with no significant titles or estates of note. But in the winter of 1804 she purchased a stretch of moorland on the edge of a small rural parish called Briar Hollow. On this land she constructed what she publicly called a home for displaced girls. Locals called it something else, the house. No plans were filed, no church oversaw it. There was no registry of orphans taken and no list of staff. The house appeared functioned and grew quiet all on its own. And yet, people knew of its existence not because of any advertisement or town meeting, but because once every 2 weeks a black carriage arrived on the same road drawn by black horses with a veiled woman inside. The villagers never saw her face, only her outline slim and tall, her gloved hand holding a thin leather book. She never spoke to the locals, not even to the vicar when he once approached the gates. She entered through a side entrance and was seen again only hours later, leaving the way she came, never glancing back. From the rear kitchen windows of the Briar Hollow Inn you could just see the edge of the house if you stood on a stool. A scullery maid named M., no surname, recorded left behind a diary discovered in 1964, in which she described what she saw through the distant glass. According to her, the lady always entered the same room, the gray parlor, which no one else was allowed to enter. The maid never cleaned it, nor had she heard anyone mention what it held. Once, she climbed to the loft and watched from a distance as a dim light flickered within. She saw the silhouettes of children lined up outside the door, placing their palms against the wood, not knocking, not speaking, just pressing skin to timber. Inside the room, she wrote, the light did not behave like any flame she'd seen. It flickered with a color she could not name. She remembered the sound that came from inside the room, a hum, low and thick, not tuneful, not dissonant, but constant and deliberate, like something breathing beneath stone. The girls who lived in the house were pale dark-haired and unusually quiet. They were brought in wagons at night, never in daylight, and never from the same place twice. There were no sounds of play, no songs, no laughter. On the days when the lady visited the house was completely silent, as if sound itself had been removed. The kitchen staff were told not to speak above a whisper and forbidden from lighting the east hallway. After the lady left, a ritual followed. The matron, an emaciated woman called only Mother Thorne, would gather the girls into a circle. She would produce a small stone bowl and pour into it a thick dark liquid that smelled of copper and cloves. Each girl drank once. No one ever refused. That night, one girl would always fall ill, not with fever or convulsion, but with stillness. She would lie in her cot, unmoving. Sometimes in the morning she would wake up and never speak again. Other times she would not wake up at all. Yet no funeral ever followed. The body was simply gone the next day. When questioned, the staff were told, "She has gone to the beneath," and nothing more. The matron had pale blue eyes, so intense that few could look into them without blinking. Her smile was said to be constant even when she wasn't speaking. A curate named Hensley, who visited briefly in 1812 to perform a general blessing of the grounds, described her as a woman who spoke as though she were chewing glass and had long since grown used to the taste. She spoke Latin fluently, especially when addressing the lady, and signed all correspondence with the phrase per sanguinem reditus, through blood the return. Hensley refused to return after his visit. When questioned by the diocese, he only said, "They are not keeping the children. The children are keeping something else." In later years, a strange pattern emerged among the few documents that did survive. Girls disappeared most often at the ages of 7 and 17. The numbers matched too cleanly to ignore. Local nurses who visited claimed the girls seemed fragile but content. One woman, Margaret Elsden, filed an informal complaint to her district office in 1851, stating that the children displayed signs of severe anemia and spoke in tones too mature for their age. 2 weeks later, she was reassigned. No further records of her career exist. That same year, the chapel of St. Enoch in the village caught fire in the night. Witnesses claimed to hear a girl's voice shouting in Latin from within before the flames overtook the structure. The parish was never rebuilt. The priest resigned and moved to Durham under another name. The house itself never burned. In fact, it never seemed to weather. Photographs taken from afar decades later show the structure unchanged. Same dark stone, same shuttered windows, on the east same narrow tower that seemed to cast a shadow longer than its size should allow. Yet, what drew the most fear among villagers was not the building, nor the girls, nor the strange matron. It was the silence. Locals began to refer to the northern edge of Briar Hollow as the place with no echo. Shepherds refused to bring their flocks close. Travelers reported their compasses spinning. Some said even birds flew around the area in a wide arc. By 1868, Briar Hollow was referred to only in passing on county maps often blurred or omitted altogether. The census of 1871 caused a stir when agents assigned to count the population of the village submitted blank entries under the Holloway estate. Their notes later recovered mentioned unease headaches and missing time. 2 men never returned. A third resigned. One left behind a single sentence in his diary before vanishing. There are no graves because nothing ever leaves. In every town there are places people refuse to speak of. In every family there are stories buried under polite silence. But what sets Briar Hollow apart is that those silences seem to grow larger, as though the village itself swallows memory and record alike. Nothing stays there, not name, not voice, not body. Only the hush remains. And in the hush, something listens. In 1871, the government was forced to address the inconsistencies surrounding Holloway House after several blank entries appeared in the national census for the parish of Briar Hollow. A team of census officers was dispatched to verify the population and report back. Of the 3 men assigned, only one returned, with a report handwritten 7 pages long and sealed immediately upon submission. That man was Edward Lyle, a mid-level clerk with no history of misconduct or imagination. His report was never entered into official census records. Instead, it was archived without classification and forgotten until it was rediscovered by accident in 1987, deep within an unsorted storage vault in Durham. In his writing, Lyle described the village as more densely populated than previously assumed, yet curiously mute. He noted the absence of sound not only from the buildings, but from the landscape itself. No dogs, no birds, no wind. He knocked on several doors. No one answered. Curtains were drawn tightly, and chimneys, though warm, emitted no visible smoke. Everything gave the impression of being lived in, but not alive. He moved toward Holloway House. According to official land records, the southern gate had been sealed decades earlier. But when he arrived, the gate stood ajar. No sign of tampering. No marks on the hinges. Just a slight opening, as though someone had passed through recently and not bothered to close it. The front hallway was coated in dust, but Lyle observed that it held no cobwebs. No insects, no rodents. No smell of decay or mold. It was not abandoned in the usual sense. It felt preserved deliberately. He entered what he assumed to be the main parlor. On the desk sat a gray leather ledger without a title. He opened it and found entries written in various hands, all carefully spaced. Each page described a different girl her age, features general temperament, but the most repeated phrase was harmonic sensitivity, a term Lyle did not understand. Comments noted things like lines, dreams with the hallway wakes during whispering intervals, no longer reacts to mirrors. There were no academic records, no adoptions, no guardianship transfers, only observations, as if the girls were not children, but instruments. He continued upstairs, where he encountered a locked door. From behind it came a soft rhythmic tapping. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. He called out but received no answer. When he descended to find a tool to open it, he noticed a shift. Though it was midday, the light filtering in through the front windows no longer cast reflections. The air was still illuminated, but there were no shadows. Objects remained lit, but without contrast. As he stepped backward, he realized something deeper was wrong. He could no longer hear his own footsteps. Outside, just beyond the front gates, 7 children stood near the fence, barefoot, dressed in identical gray garments, motionless. One child, a girl of perhaps 10, had no irises, only solid white eyes. They did not speak. They did not blink. As he turned away, a voice behind him, soft and genderless, said, "The last man to come never left. He did not turn around. He walked away without running, without speaking, and did not stop until he reached the next village 6 miles south." In his report, Lyle urged the government not to pursue the Holloway investigation any further. He wrote plainly, "Holloway House is not a shelter. It is a site of function. The children are not its inhabitants. They are its mechanism." Within the week, his report was sealed, and he was quietly transferred to a land office in Cornwall. 1 year later, he was found dead in his office, having ingested powdered metal shavings, a method of death that medical examiners called both agonizing and intentional. In his jacket pocket, a torn scrap of paper bore one sentence in pencil: "There are no graves because there's nothing left to bury." For 10 years after his death, no government agency made any effort to revisit the Holloway property. Regional roads were redirected, trade routes altered, and maps redrawn to exclude the northern woods of Briar Hollow. Shepherds and laborers in the surrounding counties began referring to it as dead land. Travelers who camped too close to the tree line often returned mute or confused. A few came back with bleeding ears. One young man reportedly pulled out 3 of his own fingernails before speaking again. Of all the stories recorded from this era, the one most frequently cited was that of Charles Hainsley, a local deer hunter who vanished into the moor for 3 days. When he returned, he did not recognize his wife or children. He claimed not to know his own name, but kept repeating a single phrase, "I saw a door that only goes in." And I don't think the children want to leave. Holloway House remained standing, not rotting, not collapsing, just there, preserved by nothing visible. And from every document, diary, and witness account recovered since, a pattern emerges. The children of Briar Hollow did not die. They did not escape. They were not adopted or relocated. They remained, quiet, unseen, and unchanged. And if what the earliest records suggest is true, they may never have been children at all. Long before Briar Hollow appeared on any map, before the rise of Holloway House or the arrival of Lady Loughton, the land it stood upon held another name, one spoken rarely and only in whispers: Lagand Moor. The word appears in a 1651 collection of local Yorkshire folk tales compiled by Reverend Tobias Kerr, a dissenting clergyman who traveled the north after his excommunication from the Church of England. In his writings, Lagand Moor is mentioned only once in a passage describing a ridge of black soil and crooked ash trees where the earth sounds hollow and no echo answers. He notes that local shepherds would walk wide around the place and that animals refused to feed near it. The land was not feared because of what was seen, but because of what was felt. A wrongness, as he called it. A weight in the soil that seemed to press upward rather than down. No settlement appears to have existed on the moor before the 19th century, but archaeological records from the 1920s, compiled during a brief excavation attempt prior to the construction of a reservoir, indicate the presence of a pre-Roman structure. Described only as a circular trench containing 6 standing stones, the site was dismissed by the Ministry of Works at the time as a primitive animal enclosure. No further analysis was conducted, and the site was flooded within the year. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Alwyn Hollowbridge, resigned from his post shortly after and never published again. In a private letter later sold at auction, he wrote, "The stones did not feel placed. They felt grown." Each surface was marked, not carved with a pattern not found in any book, but which made the back of my teeth ache to look at. One of the assistants on the project, a student named Margaret Cresswell, later recounted a night during the dig when several workers heard a rhythmic sound beneath the soil. They believed it to be natural, possibly water movement, until they realized the sound changed pitch when they spoke. It mirrored their voices in distorted harmony, not echoing but accompanying. On the 4th night, the dig was shut down without explanation. Equipment was removed. Funding vanished. All future plans were scrapped. When Holloway House was built nearly 80 years later, it was constructed less than 200 meters from the original site of the trench and stones. Though no official maps acknowledge the connection, comparisons of early property boundaries make it clear that the house was not only nearby, but deliberately aligned with the pattern of the stones. The foundation of the building matches the curvature of the original circle. The east wing, which famously lacked windows, traces the same line as what was once the trench. This architectural echo suggests intentionality, perhaps not by the builders themselves, but by whoever provided the designs. And if Lady Loughton was the one who selected the site and dictated its structure, the question becomes not why she chose this place, but how she knew of it. Very little is known about her life before 1804. Parish records mention her name in connection with an estate near Skipton and a brief engagement to a naval officer who drowned in 1799, but beyond that, she exists in fragments, legal documents, land purchases, charitable endowments, all signed in the same narrow slanted hand. The most revealing piece of information comes not from a public record, but from a private library in Cambridge, where a surviving volume of personal correspondence belonging to Bishop Matthew Harrow includes a letter sent by Loughton in 1802. The letter begins formally, but quickly turns strange. She writes of dreams filled with doors without handles, of children singing songs she has never heard but somehow remembers. She speaks of her bloodline as being thin and brittle, and that she seeks the children of the moor to restore it. She ends the letter with a warning. There is something beneath the hollow. It does not want release, it wants recognition. The phrase, children of the moor, appears elsewhere primarily in Northern English folk rituals, especially those suppressed by the Church during the 14th and 15th centuries. In these accounts, the children were not humans, nor spirits, but intermediaries, things that dwelled in places between fields and forest sleep and waking. They were said to live without time, to speak without mouths, and to wear the faces of memory. Offerings were left for them on certain nights, hair milk, the teeth of firstborns. It was believed that if they were kept appeased, a village would prosper. If not, rot would take the crops and the livestock would be born wrong. When viewed through this lens, Holloway House begins to resemble something else entirely. Not an orphanage, not a school, but a temple. A vessel built not to house children, but to hold them in place geographically, ritually, symbolically. A circle redrawn in flesh. Further supporting this theory is the discovery of a single relic recovered from the lower tunnels beneath the ruins of Holloway in 1958, when a fire partially collapsed the structure. A team of local surveyors entered what remained of the east wing and found a stairwell behind a false wall leading to a small circular chamber. At the center was a stone basin cracked through the middle and coated in something dark that flaked under light. Within the basin was a fragment of carved bone, too smooth for animal, too long for child. It bore a single groove down its center, and when exposed to flame it emitted a faint harmonic tone. The surveyors did not stay long. One of them, a man named Dennis Scholes, refused to re-enter the chamber after the first visit, stating that the walls were breathing. He left the site 2 days later and relocated without notice. The fragment and basin were catalogued, boxed, and transferred to a private antiquities vault in London, where they remain sealed. None of these facts prove anything. None of them are admissible in a court of history, but taken together they form the outline of something unmistakable. Briar Hollow was not built over something ancient. It was built with it, in accordance with it, as part of it. And the children, whatever they once were never meant to leave. By 1903, the village of Briar Hollow had entered what local registrars would later describe as an administrative decline. That phrase, clinical and detached, does little to explain what truly happened. In less than 2 decades, births slowed, marriages ceased, and the village's outer farms stood abandoned without sale or transfer. Records list no incidents of plague, famine, or mass migration. The land remained fertile. The weather remained mild. But the people, one by one, fell silent. Letters from the period speak of waking to find neighbors gone, their homes still warm, breakfasts set, animals unfed. Horses were found wandering roads without bridles. Windows left open doors, unlatched oil lamps still burning. In more than one case, meals sat half-eaten on tables. Entire families, husband, wife, child, vanished in the space of a night. Yet there was no panic, no search parties, no organized alarm. Those who remained seemed only to withdraw further, as if the village were being slowly folded inward, not with violence but with suggestion. The children of Holloway House were last seen in 1910. A postmaster named Alfred Greaves, on loan from York, was ordered to deliver a parcel addressed simply to Mother Thorne, East Wing. He recounted approaching the house from the north gate and seeing 6 girls standing barefoot on the frost-covered lawn. They did not shiver, they did not turn. They stood facing the earth, hands at their sides, eyes closed. When he passed them, not one acknowledged his presence, but he wrote that he felt as though 1,000 voices were speaking my name in a language I do not know. He left the parcel at the door and did not return. Mother Thorne was never seen again after that winter. Her name disappears from all correspondence. Payroll entries from the estate's trust end abruptly in January. When 2 county clerks arrived in March to investigate the cessation of property taxes, they found the house sealed. Not boarded, not locked, simply closed, as if the building itself had decided it would no longer receive. The interior, they noted, was absent of dust or decay. The beds were made. The hearth was cold. The air inside was described as neutral, neither fresh nor stale. The east wing was inaccessible, its corridor no longer connected to the main floor. Where a hallway had once stretched, now stood an uninterrupted wall. The foundation beneath that wing, when later excavated, revealed no crawlspace, no cellars, no remnants. Just solid stone deeper than it should have been. Between 1910 and 1923, Briar Hollow's population dropped below 50. Schools were closed. The inn shut its doors. The church bell rang one final time on Candlemas Eve, then cracked down the center the next morning. The priest left a note pinned to the altar that read, "We have been told enough times." We chose not to listen. In 1924, a formal inquiry was initiated by the Ministry of Health following multiple reports of mental collapse among civil engineers stationed in the region. These men, tasked with expanding railway access through northern Yorkshire, refused to mark any route passing near Briar Hollow. Several complained of migraines, sleep disturbances, and what one doctor called perceptual overlap, wherein waking reality appeared doubled or misaligned. When pressed, one man said, "I can hear the ground remembering." That same year, the ministry dispatched a survey team under the Rural Settlement Act to inspect Holloway House for structural integrity. Of the 5 men sent, only 2 returned. The others were declared missing. The 2 survivors submitted a single joint report, typed and unsigned. The contents were brief. The East Wing is not a location. It is a condition. We did not enter it. We were entered by it. What followed was the quiet erasure of Briar Hollow from the public domain. Maps were redrawn. The roads leading to the village were marked as private. The last resident, a woman named Eliza Dorn, died in 1931. Her obituary was never published. Her grave bears no date. By 1940, the area was labeled a preservation zone under the National Parks Act, though no wildlife studies were ever conducted. Local legends began to shift, no longer speaking of Holloway House or the children, but of the land itself. Shepherds in neighboring hills claimed that the earth around the former village sounded different when walked upon. Hollow, but not empty, as though it were full of voices sealed just beneath the soil. Of the children, no trace was ever found. No bones, no teeth, no fabrics. Not a single record of relocation, inheritance, or descent. If they remained, they did so in ways that defied documentation. If they left behind nothing, not even shadow. And yet travelers still speak of strange sights near the old boundary. Glimpses of movement through the trees. Small figures watching from the thickets. One woman in 1956 reported waking at dawn during a camping trip to find 7 small handprints pressed into the condensation on her caravan windows. They were too narrow to be adult, too symmetrical to be accidental, and too high to have been made by anything crawling. The authorities dismissed it as weather. They always do. In 1992, a postgraduate student named Marcus Elwell began researching abandoned Victorian-era orphanages for his thesis at the University of Exeter. His topic was Unremarkable, the Moral and Architectural Evolution of Child Welfare Institutions in Post-Industrial England. For the first 9 months, his research followed a predictable path: blueprints, policy reforms, period photographs. Then, while cataloging unindexed ledgers in the basement of the North Yorkshire Archive Centre, he came across a single folder labeled simply Briar. It contained 22 loose sheets, a carbon copy of a census ledger from 1891, one wax-sealed envelope that had never been opened, and a list of names, 26 in total, typed in red ink with no headers, dates, or explanations. The names had no titles or surnames. They were listed only as Clarice, Edwin May, Ruth, Linnie Jasper, etc. At the bottom, beneath the final name, Sybil, was a single handwritten note in pencil confirmed harmonic, do not transpose. The phrase disturbed Elwell. He assumed it to be a musical reference, but found no such notation in any standard classification system. The envelope was heavier than paper alone should have allowed. When he finally broke the wax and unfolded its contents, he found a brittle page containing a series of concentric circles, each marked with radial lines that corresponded roughly to the arrangement of rooms on a typical Victorian estate floor plan. But in the center of this drawing, where the grand staircase or atrium should have been, was only a spiral. Not a staircase. Just a drawn spiral inked so dark it had bled through the paper. On the reverse side, someone had written, "We built it wrong. It sings on its own." Elwell, initially intrigued, began requesting more documents. He filed 10 separate access requests to the Ministry of Housing and Local Government, all of which were denied. The final denial came with an attached warning from a solicitor stating that continued inquiry into designated rural holdings prior to 1935 may constitute violation of preservation secrecy clauses under wartime legislation. Undeterred, he turned to private collections. It was during a visit to the home of a retired priest, Father John Wensley, that he encountered the first direct witness account not preserved in government hands. Wensley, then 87, claimed to have visited the ruins of Holloway House as a young seminary student in 1947. He described the site not as abandoned, but paused. There were no signs of collapse, he said. But there were no animals. No insects, not even rot. The wallpaper had not peeled. The lamps had oil, but wouldn't light. We heard singing. Soft wrong. When asked who had been singing, Wensley replied, "The children that never left, or never arrived, or never began. I don't think they were singing to be heard. I think they were tuning." He refused to say more, and after the interview, Elwell found himself unable to contact the priest again. The phone number disconnected. Letters returned unopened. That winter, Elwell's friends began to notice changes in his behavior. He stopped attending lectures. He spoke a vibrational language and claimed that certain architectural layouts could influence memory. He began referring to Holloway House as a resonant instrument, not a structure, and suggested the children may not have been human at all, but human-shaped access points. He kept the concentric circle drawing pinned above his bed, surrounded by copies each labeled with tuning frequencies. In his final recorded lecture, Elwell presented a theory that Briar Hollow had not decayed, but folded inward to escape linear time. He argued that the house, the land, and the children were all components of a mnemonic device, something built not to remember the past, but to erase it. The house, he said, is the throat. The children are the vowel. The land is the lung. Something spoke through it. It spoke once, and the echo has not stopped. 1 week later, Elwell was admitted to a private psychiatric facility after attempting to remove the inner bones of his ear with a ballpoint pen. When restrained, he kept repeating, "It sings behind the door." It sings in perfect thirds. The facility's records were sealed. His thesis was never submitted. The Briar file once again was removed from public archives and relocated to an unknown holding site. Only one photocopy of the spiral drawing survived in Elwell's personal effects, found years later by a janitor during a routine cleanout of university storage. It was cataloged, misfiled, and digitized as part of a larger database on unexplained architectural phenomena. It remains online unlabeled and without context under the title Diagram #44. No one has explained what the spiral represents, but every few years someone finds it, and when they do, the most common observation remains the same. They say it feels like sound. In 2021, the Briar Hollow property was purchased by a London-based redevelopment firm known as Keylight Holdings. The company specialized in rural conversions, transforming derelict estates and industrial ruins into high-end retreats for urban clients seeking seclusion. Briar Hollow was to become the Holloway Project, a luxury wellness retreat centered on restoration, silence, and solitude. The ruins of Holloway House were to be preserved as a feature of atmospheric ruin, while eco-cabins would be built along the outer ridge of the moor. The project manager, Alex Wren, was a veteran of similar developments and initially dismissed the site's history as folklore. On his first site visit, he remarked that the foundations felt too clean, as though the ruins had been burned or dismantled with surgical precision. There was no graffiti, no animal nests. The floor of the east wing, where it still stood, was dustless. During the initial land survey, drones lost GPS lock when flying above the center of the property. The data showed flight paths drifting in slow spirals. One drone was recovered from a nearby tree, its onboard audio recording a persistent low tone barely audible but consistent. Engineers attributed this to signal interference. The area was flagged for limited electromagnetic irregularity. 2 weeks into groundwork, a subcontractor named Paul Havers fell ill. He complained of nausea, vertigo, and what he described as a feeling that something was listening when he thought too loudly. Medical testing revealed no cause. Havers quit the following morning without collecting his final pay. On the third week, crew members began noticing subtle shifts in acoustics around the worksite. Shovels struck soil with no echo. Boots made no crunch on gravel. Voices carried farther than they should have in open air. At the edge of the eastern foundation, one worker dropped a steel rod. It fell silently. No clatter, no vibration. Just the sight of it rolling to a stop as if muffled by an unseen barrier. When Alex Wren brought in a sound technician to measure ambient noise levels, the data returned abnormal. Decibel readings showed consistent subaudible patterns between 17 and 19 Hz frequencies associated with infrasound. These tones are not consciously heard but can induce anxiety, nausea, and in some cases hallucination. The technician noted that the tone seemed to pulse in thirds, aligning rhythmically with the human heartbeat under stress. Wren authorized a full pause on construction. He documented the findings in a memo sent to the firm's London office requesting environmental review. The reply came 3 days later, instructing him to continue as scheduled and avoid speculative reporting. When Wren protested, citing possible psychological hazard, his access to internal systems was revoked. His replacement, a younger site manager with no architectural background, arrived the following week. Within days, logs of material deliveries began to show discrepancies. Wood shipments were recorded but never arrived. Cement mixers ran for hours with no product laid. Trail cameras placed around the site for wildlife studies were wiped clean, all frames overwritten with static noise. One security guard posted overnight quit after describing figures like children pacing in the far tree line, always in groups of 7, always evenly spaced. The new manager, lacking context, dismissed the claims and pressed ahead. He greenlit excavation around the East Wing foundation, hoping to reinforce the base for planned landscaping. The crew broke ground at sunrise. By noon, they had uncovered what appeared to be a circular stone basin buried beneath 2 feet of soil. The stone was warm to the touch despite the temperature. No one had reported heat equipment running in the area. Inside the basin were markings grooved, not carved, identical to the spiral drawing recovered by Marcus Elwell decades earlier. When the foreman leaned in to photograph the grooves, he fell unconscious. Witnesses say he simply stopped moving, no collapse, no twitch, just a sudden stillness. He was revived 20 minutes later by emergency responders, and later reported no memory of the event, only that he had been listening to something slow and endless. That night, the site was vacated. Cameras recorded no movement. No wildlife entered the area. Yet, at exactly 3:33 a.m., all devices still connected to the monitoring grid recorded a harmonic pulse, 3 evenly spaced tones, each separated by silence, each exactly 3 seconds in length. Audio engineers reviewing the data noted that the tones formed a perfect minor triad. A chord, a voice. Construction was permanently halted the following week. Official documents list the site as unsafe due to seismic irregularities. All future development was suspended indefinitely. The ruins remain untouched. No public statement was issued by Keylight Holdings. The project page on their website was deleted without archive. Wren, who had moved to Brighton after his dismissal, was found dead in his flat 2 months later. Natural causes were listed, but the report notes he was found seated upright, eyes open with a spiral drawn on the wall opposite his chair. It was made with blood. His own. In the years following the final abandonment of the Holloway project, the site attracted a small but persistent circle of trespassers, urban explorers, amateur folklorists, and spiritual tourists. Most came for the aesthetic of ruined moss-choked masonry shattered beams, the suggestion of secrets buried beneath soil. Few stayed long. Fewer still returned. Those who did often left altered. In 2022, a YouTube channel called Vagrant Veil uploaded a 16-minute video titled The Orphanage That Breathes. Filmed entirely on a handheld thermal camera, it featured 2 men navigating the overgrown foundations of Holloway House under cover of night. For the first 10 minutes, the footage was unremarkable, collapsed flooring, remnants of brickwork, beams of ivy curling up what had once been windows. But near the eastern corner, the thermal camera captured something that neither man noticed at the time: 7 cold spots evenly spaced hovering just above the ground. Human-shaped but featureless. The temperature around them measured nearly 12 degrees lower than ambient. They stood motionless for 3 minutes, then vanished simultaneously as if inhaled by the air itself. The footage was removed less than 48 hours after upload. The creators issued no explanation. Their channel was later deleted entirely. Archived copies of the video exist traded in private forums and are often cited as evidence of the anomaly. But more disturbing than the footage are the voice recordings made during the final minute when neither man was speaking, yet the camera picked up faint rhythmic whispering. The whispers do not match any known language, but they repeat in a fixed meter 3 syllables, a pause, 3 syllables again. Audio analysis suggests a minor harmonic pattern layered beneath the vocalizations, again a perfect third. Outside of digital traces, the most consistent reports have come from locals living within a 5-mile radius of Briar Hollow. Over the decades, they've referred to the area with quiet names: the Deep Ring Stillmore, or simply the place that holds its breath. Though no official census lists residents in the valley, a few farmsteads still operate on the outskirts. One such farmer, an elderly man named Frederick Well, spoke in a recorded interview with a university researcher in 2004. His story was never published, but the transcript remains sealed in the University of Leeds Folklore Archive. Wale claimed that on 3 occasions between 1966 and 1971, he encountered children in his fields at dusk. They were silent, barefoot, and always appeared in even numbers 2 or 4 or 6. He remembered the girls more clearly than the boys. They never approached, but they never fled either. Just stood and watched. The detail that unnerved him most wasn't their presence but their symmetry. They never blinked at the same time, he said, but they turned their heads like geese. One movement, one muscle, like they were all part of the same thing. He never found footprints even in fresh frost. A similar pattern was described in 1987 by a teacher named Lucy Hargraves, who took a group of 6 teenagers on a day hike through the northern hills. According to her report, one of the girls, Emma, wandered off for several minutes. When she returned, she said only, "They're singing to remember themselves." No further context. She later developed intense aversion to open spaces and dropped out of school the following year. Her whereabouts remain unknown. Some accounts are more extreme. In 2013, a hiker named Benjamin Cross claimed to have entered a low clearing not marked on any ordnance maps. There he found a shallow depression in the ground lined with smooth stone and filled with dried leaves. In its center was a single child's shoe, Victorian in style, weathered but intact. He brought it home. Within a week, his dog would no longer enter his flat. Mirrors warped at the edges. Electronic devices powered off when brought near the shoe. Eventually, Cross buried it 6 feet beneath concrete in his garden. He moved 6 months later. When the new tenant dug up the garden to plant vegetables, they discovered the shoe exactly as described. Alongside it were 6 others, all identical, all aligned in a perfect circle toe to heel as if laid by design. The most recent testimony comes from an ambulance driver who was called to an unrelated medical emergency near the Hollow in December 2023. He later reported that while waiting alone in the cab, the surrounding woods fell completely silent. No birds, no wind, just a steady pressing hush. Then, without warning, the onboard radio turned on by itself. No static, just 3 tones. Soft, low, and perfectly spaced. He switched the unit off. It switched back on again. This time, a child's voice whispered a single word: home. He has not driven since. These stories, dismissed as folklore or mental stress reactions, continue to emerge. Always from different mouths, always with similar contours. Children who appear but do not move. Songs with no source. Symmetry without sense. And the spiral, the sense that somewhere beneath the moss and ash, something very old is still turning. Still remembering. Still waiting. In early 2024, Dr. Edwin Merrick, a cognitive semiotician from King's College London, published an anonymous paper titled Spiral Harmonics in Prelinguistic Structures, a Case Study in Place Memory. The paper, initially dismissed as fringe theory, was posted under a pseudonym to an academic repository, but quickly attracted attention within private research circles for its unsettling specificity. The paper referenced an unnamed structure in North Yorkshire, a failed child house, whose floor plan matched the proportions of an auditory resonator rather than a residence. Merrick proposed that the building had not been designed to house children at all, but to isolate and amplify a non-verbal frequency generated by childlike beings arranged in specific spatial alignments. He described it not as a place of residence, but as a mnemonic grid, a memory scaffold meant to contain not events, but something else entirely: the capacity to remember. Over the next 3 months, Merrick requested building plans, maps, aerial photos, and 3D scans of the remaining Holloway ruins. He fed them into a custom-designed software he called Nemesis, which mapped spatial rhythms against phoneme clusters' harmonic intervals and historical child census data. The program produced a visual overlay showing patterns that repeated names, shapes, measurements, all spiraling toward a single central absence. What should have been the great hall of the original house returned only null coordinates. No dimensions, no reflection. Just a variable left blank in every dataset. He began referring to it as the memory sink. Colleagues noticed changes. Merrick, once exacting and clear-spoken, became abstract in conversation. He began to forget proper names. He referred to his own daughter as the small echo. He described his wife as the one whose hands remain linear. When questioned about these lapses, he would become quiet, then ask in a flat tone, "Have you heard the thirds?" No one understood. He withdrew from public work entirely. For 2 weeks, no one heard from him. Then, without warning, Merrick uploaded a second file, this time a video. Titled Map of the Held. Thought it was a 7-minute silent screen recording of the Nemesis program running. It showed nothing remarkable: blueprints, overlays, waveform shifts. But near the end, the lines began to curve not by code, but seemingly of their own volition. The spiral returned. The child-shaped figures snapped into position like magnets, evenly spaced, always turning inward, and at the precise midpoint of the spiral, one word blinked onto the screen. Not typed, not coded. It simply appeared again. Merrick's office was found the next morning in disarray. Maps torn, strings unthreaded. The monitors still ran Nemesis, but the program no longer responded to input. The central coordinates, when entered manually, now returned not a blank, but a string of tones, low, steady, identical in rhythm to the pulse recorded at the Holloway site 2 years prior. Merrick himself was discovered at home, unharmed but mute. Not physically incapable of speech, his vocal cords were functional but unwilling or unable to use them. He pointed to his throat and wrote a single phrase on a legal pad. The shape is not silent. We are. He remains under observation at a private facility. Since admission, he's taken to arranging pebbles in his room into concentric shapes, always spirals, always 7 loops, always with a small gap at the center. Doctors report that when asked why he does this, he smiles faintly and mouths one syllable. Home. In February 2025, a freelance journalist named Thomas Redding began compiling the history of Briar Hollow for a long-form article intended for an independent investigative outlet. He had no prior interest in folklore and no known connection to the estate. He was drawn in by coincidence an abandoned file he received in a FOI request for an unrelated case. The file contained 3 aerial images, 2 field reports from 1964, and a partial ledger listing names of children admitted to Holloway House in 1891. His research began in the usual places. He reached out to archives in York, Leeds, and Sheffield. Most institutions returned polite refusals. Some cited misfiled records. Others replied with vague warnings. This inquiry is not recommended for further pursuit, wrote one archivist. One box arrived unmarked. Inside a single folded sheet of thick paper, a map of Holloway House drawn in charcoal with a name scrawled into the eastern courtyard. The name was Thomas Redding. He assumed it was a prank. His name is not uncommon, but when he checked the 1891 ledger fragment again, he found it listed plainly. Redding Thomas. Age 9. Origin unknown. The record had not been there before. He began to question his own research chronology. Re-examining scanned census images, he noticed subtle differences between copies missing commas, changed spellings line breaks that weren't there the day before. At first, he blamed the scanner, then the archive, then himself. But the changes grew more deliberate. One night, while reviewing oral transcripts, he fell asleep at his desk. His computer went into sleep mode. When he awoke, the transcript window had changed. It displayed no speaker labels, just a new paragraph at the bottom. They are not gone. They are gathered. We do not disappear. We become. We become and become and become. He checked the source file. The timestamp indicated it had not been edited, but the sentence remained. It aligned perfectly with the final sentence of Frederick Wales' testimony as if it had always belonged there. Redding began recording himself, hoping to catch signs of stress or confusion. The tapes revealed a calm, collected voice, except for one passage where he read aloud the names of children admitted to Holloway. During playback, his voice paused between every 7th name. Each pause was exactly 3 seconds long. After the 7th cycle, he could be heard breathing deeply, as if just waking. There were no signs of sleep on the tape. Compelled by growing unease, he returned to the site in person. It was late March. The moors were still damp, the skies low and soundless. He took no equipment, just a notebook. He walked the grounds slowly, marking old landmarks. The east wing, the tree line, the place where the stone basin had been buried. It was gone now. Just a clearing, darker than the rest. He stood at the edge and waited. He did not speak, but a sound emerged anyway, 3 tones. Not from the air, but from behind his own teeth. He closed his mouth, still the tones, each spaced exactly 3 seconds apart, no source, just vibration. He turned and left. The next day, he uploaded the first version of his manuscript. It was a clean 10,000-word investigative piece titled The Hollow Children History and Harmonics in the Yorkshire Silence. It disappeared from the platform within hours. No takedown notice. No flagged content, just absence. When he re-uploaded it, the article's headline changed, not by him. It now read, "We are already remembered." He tried again. The headline reverted, every time. Redding stopped writing. He stopped speaking. In his final audio note dated April 2nd, he said only this, "It's not a story, it's a shape, and I'm part of it. The voice on the recording is steady, but in the background, barely audible, are 7 distinct clicks. They form a perfect rhythm, 3 seconds apart. What becomes clear through scattered records and recurring patterns is that Briar Hollow was never designed to forget. It was built to carry. The spiral, once thought symbolic or architectural, reveals itself instead as a method neither artistic nor spiritual but mechanical. Not a message, but a conduit. The children brought to Holloway in 1891 were not chosen for their background skills or behavior. They were chosen for their rhythm. Handwriting samples now preserved in a private archive show that their letters formed identical arcs. Slant curve and pressure aligned with such precision that forensic analysts initially suspected forgery. But under ultraviolet scan, minor hesitations and corrected strokes reveal that these were not copies. They were original synchronized variations, different minds writing in the same shape. One medical report from 1893 recovered from the collapsed basement of a former staff residence includes sketches from a physician's notebook. It charts the resting breath intervals of 7 children. All breathe in triplets. Inhale 2 beats, hold for 3, exhale for 2. Each child tested alone in separate rooms. Yet the data shows synchronized respiration, one body extended across 7 vessels. The doctor who compiled this report, a man named Jonathan Cleary, wrote a marginal note in the corner of the final page. A simple sentence barely legible under rust-stained paper. This is not memory, it's echo. By 1895, there are no further medical records. The children disappear from administrative logs. Their names do not appear in exit ledgers, death certificates, or asylum transfers. Only the staff remain documented. Many left quietly. Some resigned without notice. 2 were institutionalized. 1 attempted to excavate the center of the Holloway grounds with his bare hands, claiming he had heard the thought. His nails were found embedded in stone. He died 11 days later, speaking only one phrase in repetition. Let them remember themselves. Modern researchers attempting to reconstruct the final months of Holloway encounter not loss, but recursion. Files loop, pages repeat. In one scanned ledger, the surname Merrick appears 3 times in 3 generations, 1891, 1954, and 2023. None of the men are related by blood. None ever lived in Yorkshire. But each shows up in records tied to auditory mapping, spiral cognition, and spatial memory work. One folder in the Leeds archive, misfiled in a box labeled Ornithology, contains hand-drawn maps of Holloway's interior as it evolved. These maps show the original building, then its partial reconstruction in 1937, then something else, floor plans extending beyond the visible structure, looping outward into the landscape, then inward again. The corridors form syllables. The staircases form harmonic intervals. Each level descends into a shape more circular than the last, until the lowest layer becomes a spiral with no center, just a hollow. The final page shows a child's handprint pressed in ash. At the center, someone has written, "We do not fade, we align." The language of the spiral is not spoken, it is felt. It is drawn in breath movement repetition. The children were not told what to become. They were arranged into it until they did not need to remember. They were the memory. They are. And so the shape continues. In April 2025, a team of independent archivists digitized the remaining fragments of the Holloway project, uploading them to a private repository. Within 48 hours, 8 of the 12 files were corrupted, not deleted, but overwritten. The file names remained intact, but the contents had changed. Each file now contained a single image, a perfect spiral drawn in faint graphite on aged paper. No title, no signature, but each spiral was slightly different. Some tighter, others wide and breath-like, some incomplete with gaps along the outer edges. Only one spiral reached the center. On that file in the margin was written, "Thank you for listening." The message was not signed, but the upload log showed the file was accessed from 3 locations simultaneously: North Yorkshire, East Sussex, and a disused IP address registered to an orphanage long since shuttered. The spiral had begun to move again. Not forward, inward. At the center of the spiral there is no revelation, no confession, no clean ending. There's only the quiet mechanism of return. The children of Holloway were not victims in the traditional sense. They were conductors of rhythm of structure of silence. They were placed in formation not to recall what had been done to them, but to anchor what was being built through them. Memory, once thought to fade instead, found shape. Breath, rhythm, symmetry. These were not coping strategies. They were architecture. Briar Hollow did not erase them. It arranged them. And the spiral ensured they would not remain contained to a single building or year or name. The design outlasted the walls. It seeped into maps, music census logs, dreams architecture, and the skin of those who came looking. Like Thomas Redding, like Merrick, like the girls who walked in even numbers across the moor. They are not copies. They are iterations. The spiral does not repeat. It completes. One final report, anonymous undated, was found tucked inside a borrowed university interlibrary loan book on harmonic patterning. The paper was folded once. It contained no letterhead. Just 5 lines written in block capitals. I came to understand a story. I heard it first in the quiet. Then I saw the children lined in stone. They sang a song with no words. Now I sing it too. Below the lines was a circle drawn in ink. 7 dots ringed its edge. No center. It is not known who wrote it, but it is still there, and it will be there the next time you read this. Because the spiral does not end when the story stops. It ends when you remember.